This hobby station has served me well for almost 4 years, but I think it's time for an upgrade. I designed this hobby station about 4 years ago, had it laser cut locally, and assembled it in my old flat. These drawers, paint racks and brush holders have seen me through countless hours of hobbying. But I designed this system when my miniatures hobby was a much smaller part of my life, and long before there was any consideration that I might be using this as the backdrop for YouTube videos. So today I want to walk you through how I'm going to take this patchwork hobby setup and turn it into this, my dream hobby station and miniatures filming desk. And of course, because you're watching this channel, that means we'll be doing this with a whole lot of 3D printing. This video will be the first in a series. Today, taking a look at the system that we'll be using, all the parts we need to print, and exactly what the plan is for this desk. In future videos, we'll be covering my printer settings and printing most of this setup. Then we'll be looking at the tools, paints, and brushes that will live in it, and finally, how the setup will allow me to film better videos easier. So without further ado, here's the plan. I recently backed a Kickstarter for the Hobby Boss system by BattleBoss, a set of files designed to allow for fully modular hobby station builds. Unfortunately, at the time of filming this first video, there are still a few files waiting to be delivered, but for now we have more than enough to start planning this project. The first issue I want to address is that at the moment I have a limited number of drawers, to the point that I have cross-contamination of various things in each drawer. My tools drawer has everything from knives, blades and markers to sculpting tools and milliput. My big drawer has half-finished minis, sponges, basing stuff, and just a bunch of random crap. Plus, I need somewhere to put non-urgent half-painted models so that they're not always on display in videos. So, first and foremost, we need some storage. A good mix of their half and full height drawers should do the job for this. Let's say 2, actually no, let's go for 3 rows of these, I think should work out nicely. This will allow me plenty of room to store a bunch of things separately. Bases can go next to basing supplies, cleanup tools like knives and sanding sticks can be separated from sculpting tools and stuff like milliput, and all of the extra drawers will allow me to keep things, like my hobby handles, at an arm's length, where previously things like this just sat in a bucket on the floor. Then there is the matter of paints. I have a collection of paints mostly consisting of army painted dropper bottles, which is currently split up between my storage and the included paint rack from the mega set. But I do also have some Citadel paints from earlier in my hobbying that I still really like to use. So I think what we'll do is add a section of paint storage with 50 slots for my Fanatic mega set, a few extra rows of paint storage for my speed paints and old collection of war paint, and a small rack dedicated to the slightly larger Citadel-sized paint pots. This will give me enough room to store all of my paints laid out next to each other so that I can visibly see what I have to work with, and it'll keep everything at an arm's length. But there is still a few more bottles and other tools that I want to store in a similar fashion. Firstly, my larger army painted bottles of primer and varnish would be really nice to have easy access to, and I would still like somewhere to keep my various glues within reach. For that, and to bridge this gap, a small shelf with some extra drawers will be a good place to sit my open glue bottles, and to store unopened ones as well. And this larger paint rack will allow for those army painted dropper bottles, and some of my smaller varnish bottles as well. If you're enjoying this video so far, subscribe down below to stay up to date with the future videos in this project. And if you want to support the channel further, consider jumping over to the Patreon, where for just a couple of bucks you can get access to the Painted for Combat community Discord, and all of my printer profile downloads. Or, at the higher STL tiers, get access to an awesome STL welcome bundle, which includes the painting handles that I use in almost every miniatures video, as well as monthly FDM-friendly bases, like our May release, the Industrial Hive. Awesome grimdark bases, perfect for industrial factories, metal worlds, or any mechanically inclined factions. All designed to print with no supports on FDM machines, and created in a way to minimize visible layer lines by maintaining flat top surfaces. So, no ugly overhangs or visible layer line stepping. Now, even if you've only been half paying attention, you've probably noticed that there is a giant hole in the center of my design. And the more keen-eyed among you have probably noticed that there's no accessible storage for brushes, or anywhere to display work-in-progress minis. And that's because we already have that. For a while, I mucked about with the idea of modeling some custom pieces for this system, to fill in those holes and fit those needs. However, after some measuring and a little more mucking about, I realized that, actually, this gap is the perfect width and height to just slot in my existing brush storage and display boxes, meaning that we do actually get to keep some of this old system integrated with the new one, which I think is pretty neat. At this stage, the setup is pretty much functional and ready to head over to the printer. But given that this isn't entirely just a functional workspace, but will also be the backdrop for many YouTube videos, I want to add a few more finishing touches before we continue. I really do like having a few minis from previous videos on display in the background, and I also really adore this logo that I printed to test the AMS on the A1. By adding a few of their pinboard squares to our setup, and by creating a custom mounting bracket for the logo, this print will be able to hang front and center in the new setup. In terms of displaying models in the background, currently there aren't really any shelves provided with the setup that will give the look I want to achieve. So I'll spend some time modelling up a flat 100mm shelf for larger models, and a smaller 80mm stepped shelf where I can display some units of smaller models. For the right hand side of this pinboard, I'm going to leave this blank for now, only because I know that when the rest of the files are delivered for this system, there'll be a few more functional pinboard pieces that I might want to add in later. And because we have some extra space back here, I'll also sneak a few extra drawers into this corner. Now, this is all looking well and good and about ready to progress to the next stage. But before I start showing you some test prints and looking at materials, there is one major element missing from this layout. Currently there's nowhere to mount any lights or cameras, which means it's going to be a little bit hard to see and paint my minis, let alone film them. This is where our build is going to deviate slightly from 3D printing and more into the realm of professional level equipment. The small amount of desk space left unused at the front of the table will be the mounting point for a desk-mounted camera rig. And unlike my old camera arm that was mounted on one side of the table and shook like crazy when I was painting, not to mention that it's also not the prettiest thing to have in the background of videos, the new rig will be mounted on both sides of the table, making it much more stable, will run the full height of the setup to keep it out of the way in videos, and will give me freedom of placement where I can mount my lights and camera, giving me more options for cool camera angles in videos. So that's the plan, a hobby station with ample storage, paint racks, brush holders, and display shelves, which will make for awesome miniature painting projects and filming, while also providing an awesome backdrop for videos. But before I leave this first part of the series here, let's at least take a look at some test prints that I've run and figure out what materials we're going to be using for this project. This is a partial paint rack from the system that was printed across both my A1 and my Neptune 4 Pro. And as nice as it would be to be able to split this project across the two printers, I have found that they somewhat differ in their dimensional accuracy, resulting in slightly different size parts. So I'll probably limit this project to just the A1. In initially printing these test parts, I found that the clips for this system were fitting a little bit loose when printed on the A1. So I simply bulked them up a bit in Blender until they were sitting a little more snug. Overall though, after putting some paints in here and taking a bit of a look, I have to say, very excited to get the rest of this all printed up and put together. Speaking of printing, we're going to need some material. And quite a lot of material. This is just 8 of the probably 12 or 13 rolls that we're going to need for this project. I'll be telling you more about this PLA in the next video where we actually start printing up the final pieces for this hobby station, but in short, I decided to go for a nice semi-matte marble PLA from the team over at Sediment. And I'll also be using some of their other materials to print up the accent pieces for the station as well. As sad as it will be to say goodbye to my current hobby station that's been with me for almost 4 years, I definitely think it's time for an upgrade. Time to move on and improve this setup. Not only for my miniature painting hobby, but also for the production of videos here on Painted for Combat. And as we found out that luck would have it, we do still get to keep some of this setup in the new workspace. Like if you liked and drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think of the new setup, or if you think there's anything I've missed. Of course, subscribe to stay up to date with the rest of this project as it drops here on the channel, but most importantly, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a good one.